What's up guys, today we're talking about DeFi passive income. How much can you make through DeFi passively in a safe way? And the key word here is in a safe way. So a lot of people advertise a consistent 100% or even a 300% APR, right? But the reality is you're taking on a lot of risk using those strategies, and you could end up losing a big amount of your capital if you're chasing a lot of APR. But before we dive in, let me show you guys my current portfolio. I yield farm with mostly concentrated liquidity pools and have great results doing it. You could see my portfolio in Ethereum terms is up right now about 11.26 ETH. The closed position totals at 7.7 Ethereum. So sitting on roughly 19 Ethereum worth of profit right now. All the meanwhile, I'm earning roughly 45.4% APR on my current liquidity, and you can see I'm beating impermanent loss pretty comfortably here. Sometimes DeFi people don't like concentrated liquidity pool because they think that it's very hard to beat impermanent loss, but with every strategy, if you know the mechanics behind it, there's always a way to hedge against the downside of each strategy. So doing quite well for myself, earning more than my current salary with the DeFi income. Hopefully with this channel I can help you guys do this as well. So in this video we'll go over exactly how much you can earn, as well as a few different ways you could earn passive income from DeFi. And lastly, we're going to set a goal for ourselves to basically build up that capital to be enough to replace our entire income and cover all of our annual expenses. So if we look at this DeFi income formula here, it's basically your invested capital multiplies by the conservative APR you could generate, which comes out to your annual income. So my current portfolio is running a medium to high risk strategy right now. The APR might be a little bit higher than people that are just yield farming blue chip pools, right? So we could start with a more conservative estimate and we could work our way up to a higher risk APR. Let's say you guys are yield farming with $10,000. You multiply that by a number I like to use for a more conservative return is 10%. So that's $1,000 per year of income. To some people, it might not be a lot, right? But those returns are going to compound over time. And this assumes that you're not putting more money into DeFi, right? If you only have $10,000 to yield farm with, generating a 10% return, not including any asset appreciation, then you're expected to grow your portfolio by $1,000 per year. But if we go back to the $10,000, if we are able to generate a 25% APR, which is pretty achievable with concentrated liquidity pool, now you're looking at $2,500 per year. If we divide it by 12, that's roughly $200 per month, right? So not that bad at all. $200 a month could go a long way for most people, but nothing too life-changing, right? You cannot replace your income with like $200 a month. And if you guys are running a medium risk strategy, maybe the APR you're generating is 50%, that's $5,000 per year and roughly $400 per month. And if you're strictly running higher risk strategies, let's say you're able to generate a 75% APR, then that's $7,500 per year divided by 12, $600 a month. So quite a decent chunk of income with only $10,000 of capital. You can't really generate that amount of cash flow with anything else, right? In the traditional finance market, you'd be lucky to be cash flowing like 4 to 5% if you still want the initial investment capital to grow. But the APR I like to use, again, is the conservative one. You could drop it all the way down to 10% if you're working with a lot of capital. But if you're willing to take a bit more risk, we could expect roughly 25 to 75% APR from concentrated pools. And everyone's situation is different, right? Let's say you have $100,000, multiply that by 50% APR, that's $50,000 per year and could likely cover all of your annual expenses if you live pretty modestly in a lower cost of living area. And if you build your portfolio to $1 million, for example, even generating a 25% APR on $1 million, that's $250,000 per year of income that you could use to reinvest and to pay for your expenses. This is what I'm trying to do with my current DeFi portfolio as well. You can see my current liquidity is worth roughly 141,000, but I am still trying to build my way up to $1 million in DeFi eventually. And you guys can see some of these blue chip pools here are generating like 16-17% APR, right, on Ethereum and Solana, which is much safer than like smaller cap pools, like for example Bonk to ETH or this AIXBT to ETH, and even smaller cap meme coins, right? And sometimes DeFi people just basically turn off when they hear meme coin or they think that it's not going to be profitable. But actually, if you guys look at my current portfolio, my meme coins are actually doing quite well compared to a more solid project like Aerodrome and ETH here. So just because it's a meme coin doesn't mean that it's not going to outperform DeFi projects or other projects that have actual revenue, right? So I encourage you guys to run your own numbers. Again, I wouldn't go over 25 to 75% APR in terms of a more conservative APR. So really the investor capital is the main lever that you could pull. For example, you started with $10,000, right? Then you want to work your way up slowly by either adding the income from other sources. If you make money from airdrops, from trading, or from your job, your business, you want to invest that into DeFi, which is going to grow your annual income, right? And once your DeFi portfolio is big enough, like mine is, you could actually use the annual income to grow your DeFi portfolio while using it to pay for some expenses. So what are the four main ways to earn from DeFi? A lower risk strategy could include lending and staking. You could generate a rough 3 to 15% APR with these strategies, and they're typically lower risk and lower reward. If we hop onto a platform like Aave here, there are a lot of different markets you could choose from. For example, Arbitrum on an Ethereum layer 2. You can see the APY for supplying USDC here is roughly 3.67%. And this number fluctuates, right? If we dig deeper and zoom out to 1 year, you can see the amount of APR you could gain is roughly 5.48% over a span of 1 year. And these rates are typically really good when people are borrowing a ton of USDC, right? And you can lend out your other assets as well, for example, Ethereum, or use your assets to leverage up and yield farm with tokens like Wrap Stake Ethereum. And let's look at staking really quickly here. This is stakingrewards.com. You can see I could generate a rough APR of 3.06% for Ethereum, and tokens like Solana or Polkadot that has higher inflation could offer upwards of 8% to 11.68%. And if we click deeper here, you guys can see there are a lot of staking providers. Some are liquid staking like Lido Finance. This token right here, Wrap Stake ETH, is basically a liquid staking token that automatically accrues the reward from staking. Let's say you buy one Wrap Stake ETH, right? If you earn 3% per year, next year your Wrap Stake ETH is going to be worth 1.03 Ethereum if you bought like 1 Ethereum worth of Wrap Stake ETH. And then the next year it might be a little bit more than 1.06 because those rate of return does compound, right? But you can see nothing too crazy here, and typically again, the higher the reward rate, the higher the risk you are making. So if you want to go for higher risk tokens, be sure to do your own research, right? I'm not your financial advisor, so I can't tell you what to do with your money. I can only share what I do with my money, right? But that's basically staking, and what I like to do the most is providing liquidity. We're yield farming with concentrated liquidity pools like Ethereum to Solana, where I could set a custom range of where I want my liquidity to be concentrated on. And as long as the price stays in that range, I will be earning fees if there are people making swaps into this pool, right? And this is how you guys could trade tokens on chain in the first place, is because there are liquidity providers like myself that deposit these tokens into platforms like Uniswap. And the reason why I like this a lot is because if you guys look at this yield here, it's 45%. But it's actually not the yield on cost, right? It's taking this current liquidity number and giving you a current APR of my current capital, even though it's higher risk because I'm taking on risk on these two underlying assets. if Solana doesn't do well, for example, and it goes to zero, in an extreme case, then my whole liquidity pool would go to zero, right? But when we're yield farming with these tokens, we're typically betting on tokens that are going to outperform the market and tokens that are not going to bleed out and lose value over time. But what we could actually do is gain a huge amount of yield on your cost basis. For example, this bond to ETH is showing like a rough 65.98% APR on this HODL value, or a rough 58-59% APR on this current capital US dollar value. But if we use Ethereum as the reference value, which is what I invested in the first place, right? My yield is much higher because it's taking the fees divided by this Ethereum value that I deposited. But you can see I had some capital appreciation here with the pooled asset. So then I'm actually earning 83% on my cost basis. Another example that I have really low cost basis on is this Pixel to ETH. You can see I'm generating a 77% APR on my cost basis, which is really great, right? And if I took profits on a lot of these, my cost basis actually goes to zero. And then basically I'm just earning free money at that point with very low risk, right? Because I already got all of my initial investment back. So this is why I like to provide liquidity. And lastly, there are leverage lending strategies or leverage staking where you loop these assets and basically arbitrage like the yield. Because if you guys go back to this lending page, sometimes there is a spread between the APR. What you could basically do is deposit a higher risk token with a higher APR. You borrow the lower risk one, which typically has lower APR, right? And then you buy that higher risk one and then deposit again to earn the spread on the yield. I haven't done a lot of this myself, but I see a lot of people doing it. That's why I don't really teach it. But with this strategy, you are taking on more smart contract risk as well, or those higher risk assets. For example, this LUSD stablecoin, I haven't looked into it, or this Frax token. If those depeg, that could liquidate you and you could lose money, right? So it's not risk-free either. There is no such thing as risk-free yield. There's like low risk and medium to high risk, right? And even in traditional markets, buying treasury bonds are not risk-free yields either because you're getting eaten away by inflation. And hopefully this video gives you like a rough idea of the return you could generate. But before we hop off, I just want to show you guys this formula to help you set a goal to hit financial freedom using DeFi. What we want to do here is take our annual expense divided by a conservative APR to get this freedom number. For example, I know that I could live pretty comfortably on a $30,000 annual salary because I live in a moderate to low cost of living area and I don't spend a lot of money. If I use a traditional investment strategy, which I could pretty comfortably withdraw roughly 3 to 4% per year on my investment, and I want to be more conservative, then I will divide my annual expense by 0.03. It will show here that I would need $1 million to basically be financially free, to retire early, and not have to work if I don't want to. But with DeFi, again, if you want to be more conservative, you could use 10%. I would only need $300,000, right? Roughly 70% less that I need to save than if I were just using traditional finance, and a very achievable target for most people if you just invest into DeFi consistently and let your wealth compound over time, right? And if we go back to 30,000, we use a more conservative concentrated pool APR of 25%. I would only need 120K, right, to basically live financially free, and I have achieved exactly that. I do make at least $3,000 to $4,000 per month. Depending on the market condition, it might be slightly lower than that. I'm basically financially free if I sell all of my fees and not trying to grow my portfolio, right, to pay for all of my expenses. But right now, I am still in growth mode. I'm trying to aim higher. I'm not stopping just at 6 figures, right? I want to get to 7 figures, hopefully this cycle, but if not in the next 5 to 10 years, right? I'm not in a rush, but I just want to show you guys what is achievable for yourself. And I made all of these money through basically crypto and DeFi, right? It's not like I had a very high paying job. In fact, my job probably pays me less than like $20,000 per year. But still, I was able to build this portfolio in under 4 years. So it is possible to retire early through DeFi, especially if you guys implement the strategies that I teach you in this channel. We're running safer strategies. We're not squeezing the range, right? Setting a really tight range, incurring a ton of impermanent loss, and losing your initial capital. That's how a lot of people run their strategies and get into trouble when yield farming in the first place. And lastly, I want to go over this compound interest calculator just to show you guys the effect of compounded growth. So let's say we're saving for the next 30 years, even if you started with zero, right? And then you contribute $500 a month. And if you gain a 10% return on your investment that you compound over time in the next 30 years, while contributing only $500 a month to your investment, you can see over 30 years, you would have almost $1 million, right? And if we look at this contribution here, you only put in 180K and 82% of it came from compounded growth. So this is why compounding your growth and like letting your investment work for you is very important. Over a long enough time span, you could make a lot of money even if you started with very little money, right? And if you were to put $1,000 per month, for example, then by year 30, you would have almost $2 million, right? And a 10% return per year from crypto is not unreasonable at all, even with the huge market dump. If you measure the low of my portfolio last year to the low of this year, basically Ethereum, which my portfolio is pretty heavy on, actually dropped much more to this year, but because I was running good strategies and yield farming, I was actually able to grow my portfolio by roughly 80% if we measure from the low to low. And you can see the proof right here, right? The low of my portfolio last year is roughly 53K, and then it went to roughly 70 to 80K, but I also took out like 15K last year. If you factor that in, that's roughly a 80% gain. And I'm actually close to breaking all-time high of my portfolio, even though Ethereum is still lagging behind and haven't broken $4,000. So these strategies do work, right? 10% is very conservative when we're trying to grow our investment portfolio. And even if you guys just dollar cost average into Bitcoin, right, and you expect Bitcoin to grow by 20% per year over the next 30 years, we're now looking at like $14 million, right, of your portfolio. And for my personal portfolio, I could give you guys like the numbers really quickly here. If I compound my growth for only 10 years, and I currently have roughly $140,000 in terms of liquidity, right? Not including my HODL portfolio. If I grow my portfolio by only 20% per year, you can see I would hit almost a 7 figures in a 10 years time span, even with a very conservative return rate, right? Like I said, I was able to retain roughly 80% of return last year. If I could keep that up, I would blow up to like 50 million, right? But I think everyone would probably have a bad year. So if we keep a conservative like 20 to 30%, it's still a huge amount of gains if you compound your gains. So I hope that makes sense, guys. Like run through your own numbers. Try to figure out how much money you need to basically be financially free from DeFi. And if we hop back to this formula here, you could know right off the bat how much you could expect to earn from DeFi, right? What I personally don't recommend is like, let's say you go in with $10,000 and then you expect to earn like a 150% APR, right? And then you're super excited that you think you're going to earn like $15,000 the first year into DeFi based on the fees alone. But typically a high APR like that is not very sustainable. People squeeze the range to do it and then eventually they will get wrecked, right? There's plenty of video on my channel that talks about risk and why I don't like tight range liquidity pool, even though on paper it seems like it's higher return, right? So be sure to check those out if you like this video. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already. You could turn on the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish a new video. And I really hope this video helped you out and kind of give you a big picture overview of what is achievable with DeFi. It's one of the best investments that I have found in the crypto space, so I think it's worth the time to dig deeper into it, especially if you're a longer term investor. You can make a ton of cash flow with DeFi. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys next time.